The lonely prince saw a poor mother returning her baby's milk. His gesture changed everything. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. Mary Whitfield held her baby closer, as if her arm could keep the cold from daring to touch him. "Just a little longer," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "We shall not be late." The bell above the shop door gave a thin sound when she stepped inside. Warmth met her face for a moment, then faded into the ordinary air of a small dairy. A woman behind the counter looked up with the weary vigilance of someone who had learned to measure people by their shoes. Mary kept her chin level. She did not rush. If she moved too quickly, she would look guilty. If she looked guilty, she would be treated like it. "Morning," the woman said. "If you've come for credit again, I have not," Mary replied, and her voice came out steady enough to surprise even her. "I have come to pay." The woman blinked, then reached for a bottle and a small jug set aside behind her. "Milk, then? Same as yesterday?" Mary nodded. She watched the woman's hands, not because she feared being cheated, because she needed to hold her gaze on something that did not judge. The bottle was set down. The price was spoken as if it were the weather. Mary loosened the small purse at her wrist. She poured her coins into her palm one by one. They were cold. They were honest. They were not enough. She counted once, then again, as if the second count might conjure another coin from the air. Her throat tightened. The baby stirred. His small mouth sought without finding, and he made a soft sound against her shawl. The sound cut through Mary's composure like a needle. "I'll pay," she said quickly, and slid the coins toward the counter. The woman scooped them up with practiced speed. Her fingers paused. Her eyes sharpened. "That is short," she said. Mary's cheeks warmed. She kept her hand still on the counter, refusing to snatch anything back. "It is not," Mary lied, then hated herself for it. The woman tipped the coins into her own palm and counted them slowly, letting each one click. When she finished, she looked straight at Mary. "It is short by 2 pence." Mary swallowed. 2 pence might as well have been £2. "I can bring the rest this afternoon," Mary said. "I am owed for stitching." "You were owed yesterday," the woman replied, "and the day before." Mary held her gaze. "I do not ask you to trust my hopes, only my hands. I work. I will pay." "You work," the woman echoed, and there was something almost pitying in it, which made Mary's pride stiffen. "So do I, and I must pay my supplier. I cannot feed the neighborhood on promises, Mrs. Whitfield," Mary said. "Mary Whitfield." The woman's mouth tightened, as if names were another kind of debt. "Mrs. Whitfield. Then you know the rule. Payment first." Mary's fingers curled into her palm. She felt the baby move again, impatient now. "I understand," Mary said, and forced the next words out as if they were not tearing at her. "Then I will not take it." The woman hesitated. "You will leave without?" Mary slid the bottle back, gently, as if it were a fragile thing and not her child's mourning. "Yes." The woman's eyes flicked to the baby. For a heartbeat, her face softened. Then it hardened again, not with cruelty, but with fear of her own softness. "I'm sorry," she said, and it sounded as if she meant it and resented meaning it. "There is no use crying at me, child. I cannot." Mary's breath came shallow. She refused to blink too much. She would not cry, not here, not where it could be turned into sport. "I did not come to cry," she said. She gathered the purse, tied it, and lifted her baby a little higher. Her arm trembled. She adjusted her shawl so the child's face was hidden from view. "Good day," she said. The bell sounded again as she left, and the street greeted her with its usual indifference. People passed, cartwheels clattered. A man called out the price of coal, as if nothing in the world could be more urgent. Mary walked 3 steps before her knees felt weak. Not now, she told herself, not here. She had learned the art of walking even when her body wanted to fold. She walked as though she had a destination and a plan, and not like a woman who had just returned her child's milk. A carriage rolled slowly along the street, not at the pace of business, but at the pace of someone who did not like to be jostled. The horses were well kept, the wheels were clean. Mary did not look at it. Looking invited trouble. Looking invited being seen. But she felt it anyway, like a shadow drawing near. Inside the carriage, Prince Edward pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. "Must we crawl?" he asked. His companion, a man with the stiff posture of an attendant, leaned forward slightly. Your Highness wished to see the city this morning. I wished, Edward said, to breathe without hearing my own name every other moment. That will be difficult, the man replied, careful as always. Your Highness's name follows you. Edward let out a short breath that might have been a laugh if it held any amusement. He shifted, peering through the glass. London moved in fragments, faces, doorways, hands carrying baskets. It should have been nothing to him. And yet, the ordinary life outside the palace walls always unsettled him. It was not that he had never seen it. It was that it never ceased to exist, no matter what dances were arranged, no matter what speeches were given. The carriage slowed further, as a knot of pedestrians crossed in front. Edward's eyes landed on the dairy shop, not because dairies were rare, but because a woman stepped out of it with a particular stillness. She did not look like someone who had purchased what she came for. Her hands were empty, her shoulders were tense. She held a bundled infant close, as if he were the only valuable thing she possessed. Edward watched her take 3 steps. He saw her pause. He saw her swallow. He saw her force her feet forward again. Stop, Edward said. His attendant turned at once. Your Highness? Stop the carriage. The man's eyebrows rose, then he signaled the driver. The carriage halted. Edward opened the door before his attendant could protest. Cold air rushed in. He stepped down onto the street, boots meeting damp stone. Sir, the attendant murmured, hurrying after him. We ought not— I am not made of glass, Edward said, and his voice carried the weariness of having to insist on his own humanity. He moved toward the woman. Mary heard footsteps behind her and tightened her hold on her baby. She did not turn immediately. She had learned that turning too quickly looked like fear, and fear made men curious. A voice, measured and unfamiliar, spoke near her shoulder. Madam, Mary turned. A gentleman stood there, well-dressed, but not flamboyantly. His coat was fine. His gloves were clean. His hair was neatly arranged as if disorder were not permitted in his world. His face was young enough to be handsome, old enough to be tired. Mary's first instinct was to lower her eyes. Her second was anger at herself for having that instinct. Yes, she said, keeping her gaze on his collarbone rather than his eyes. It felt safer. I beg your pardon, he said. I did not mean to startle you. You have not, Mary replied, though her heart was beating too hard. He glanced at the child. His expression changed, very slightly. Not pity, something else. A kind of disturbance. I was passing, he said, and it was a lie meant to sound like truth. I saw you leave the shop without what you went in for. Mary's lips pressed together. Then you saw too much. I saw a mother, he said quietly, and a child. Mary's voice sharpened. Many children are born in London, sir, and many mothers. We do not all require a stranger's notice. Edward flinched not at the words, but at the control behind them. He had expected gratitude, or tears, or avoidance. He had not expected a blade made of manners. You are right, he said. Forgive me. Mary shifted her baby higher. If you have nothing else, I must go. Wait, Edward said, and the word came out too quick. He softened it at once. Please, I can remedy what happened inside. Mary's eyes lifted at last, meeting his. Remedy. He nodded, as if he were offering something sensible. You were short, I heard it. Mary's spine stiffened. You listened at the counter. No, Edward said, then realized honesty would serve him better than pride. Yes, I was close enough to hear. I did not mean to intrude. Yet here you are. Yes. There was a pause, full of the street's noise. Mary's baby made a small, hungry sound, and Mary's jaw tightened around it. Edward looked toward the dairy. Allow me to pay the difference. Mary's laughter was a single breath without humor. And what should I give in return, sir? Edward's eyes widened. Nothing. Mary's voice stayed calm. That is what gentlemen always say. I am not bargaining, Edward said. I am offering help. Mary's gaze flicked past him. She saw his attendant hovering a few steps away, watching her as if she might be a thief. She saw passers-by slowing, sensing a story. That was the danger, not hunger. Hunger could be endured. A story could devour you. I do not accept charity, Mary said. Edward's mouth tightened, not in anger but in thought. He took a slow breath as if he had to remind himself he was not giving orders in a drawing room. "Then do not accept it as charity," he said. "Accept it as a debt I owe to my own conscience." Mary blinked at that, caught between irritation and something she would not name. "Your conscience is a costly thing," she said. "Mine is all I possess." Edward nodded once, as if she had struck the right place. "Then keep it. I will not take it from you." Mary shifted her weight. Her arm was beginning to ache. The baby's movements were growing more urgent. "You speak well," she said, cautious now. "Well enough that I should mistrust it." Edward's lips parted, and for a moment he looked almost boyish, as if he did not know what to do with the truth of that. "I do not blame you," he said. Mary's eyes narrowed. "Then leave me be." Edward hesitated. He looked at the infant again. His gaze softened, then steadied with decision. "May I ask," he said, "how old he is?" Mary's body tightened. "He is not for your amusement." "No," Edward said quickly. "No, I only mean, if he is very young, he should not go without." Mary held herself still. "He is 7 months." Edward drew in a breath. 7 months. Not a newborn. Not a passing inconvenience. A life that had been carried through winter and hunger, and whatever grief had put Mary alone in the street. Edward glanced back at the dairy shop. "I will not press a coin into your hand," he said. "I can see you would throw it into the gutter out of pride." Mary lifted her chin. "I would not throw money away." "No," Edward agreed. "You would starve yourself before you wasted it." Mary's cheeks heated. "You know nothing of me." "I know you returned milk rather than plead," Edward said. "That is enough to tell me something." Mary's lips parted, then closed again. She hated that he had seen it. She hated that he spoke of it as if it meant anything noble, when it was only desperation dressed as discipline. Edward stepped toward the dairy door. Mary's voice cut after him. "Do not." He stopped, turning back. "Then what do you ask of me?" Mary's hands trembled around her baby. She steadied them. "I ask you," she said, "to stop making my life a spectacle." Edward's face tightened with something like shame. "That is not my aim. It is the result," Mary replied. "Your boots are too clean. Your coat is too fine. People will talk because you have spoken to me." Edward glanced at the street. A pair of women had slowed near a stall, pretending to examine apples. A boy lingered, eyes bright with curiosity. The attendant's posture screamed importance. Edward realized she was right. His presence was already doing harm. He took another breath, then made a choice. "Come," he said to Mary, and when she stiffened, he corrected himself at once. "Not with me. Only walk back to the shop with me for a moment. I will speak to the woman behind the counter. You will not be required to thank me. You will not be required to speak to me again after." Mary stared at him. "And what if I refuse?" Edward's gaze dropped to the baby. "Then I will remain here, regretting my helplessness, and you will walk away with empty hands." Mary's throat tightened. She hated him for making it plain. She hated herself more for needing the help. "I am not helpless," she said, though her voice wavered. Edward's answer was gentle. "Not in spirit, but the child is hungry." The baby's small sound rose again as if to agree. Mary's eyes stung. She blinked hard. "You are doing this for yourself." Edward did not argue. "Perhaps, but it will feed him." Mary held his gaze, searching for mockery, for the smugness of a man performing goodness. She did not find it. She found an odd sincerity that looked like discomfort. "All right," she said, and each word cost her. "One moment, and then you leave me." Edward nodded. "I will." Mary turned back toward the shop. Edward walked beside her, not too close, as if he understood that even proximity could feel like an insult. Inside, the bell rang again. Mrs. Pritchard looked up sharply. Mary approached the counter with her baby and kept her eyes forward. The prince stood a half-step behind her. His attendant hovered near the door like a warning. Mrs. Pritchard's gaze flicked from Mary to Edward's coat, then to the attendant's posture. Her face changed, wary now. "Yes?" she asked, voice guarded. Edward spoke before Mary could. "The milk you set aside. I would like it placed on my account." Mrs. Pritchard blinked. "Your account, sir?" "Yes." Mary's hands tightened. She said nothing. If she spoke, she might betray herself. Mrs. Pritchard looked at Mary again, and Mary saw calculation there. Not about money, about trouble. "I do not keep accounts for strangers," Mrs. Pritchard said carefully. Edward reached into his pocket and drew out a coin. Not a handful. One coin, heavy enough to matter. He placed it on the counter without flourish. "Now you do," he said quietly. Mrs. Pritchard's eyes widened at the coin. She did not touch it at first, as if it might burn. Mary's gaze dropped despite herself. The metal was brighter than what she carried. Too bright. Too clean. Mrs. Pritchard swallowed. "Sir, I cannot—" "You can," Edward said, still quiet. "And you will." Mary's eyes lifted. "Sir." Edward turned toward her at once. The command in his voice softened. "I beg your pardon," he said to her, not to the shopkeeper. "I did not mean to speak as if I owned the room." Mary's throat tightened at the apology. It was the last thing she expected, and it made her feel unsteady in a new way. Mrs. Pritchard finally picked up the coin with 2 fingers. Her voice dropped. "That is too much. Keep what is owed," Edward said. "Set the rest aside for other mothers who might come up short." Mrs. Pritchard's mouth fell open a fraction. Mary stared at Edward. "You cannot simply—" "Yes," he said, meeting her gaze. "I can, and I will. It is not a gift to you, Mrs. Whitfield, it is a correction." Mary flinched. "Do not use my name." Edward paused. "I heard it before." Mrs. Pritchard cleared her throat and reached for the bottle. She wrapped it quickly, as if speed would prevent questions. Mary's hands were full, so she did not take it immediately. Mrs. Pritchard hesitated, then held it out. Mary stared at it as if it might accuse her. "You may take it," Mrs. Pritchard said, softer now. "No one will stop you." Mary did not move. Edward spoke, low enough that only Mary could hear. "Take it. For him." Mary's eyes burned again. She hated that she was grateful. She hated that gratitude felt like surrender. She shifted her baby slightly and took the bottle into the crook of her arm. Her fingers brushed the paper wrap, and it felt absurdly heavy with meaning. "Thank you," she forced out, but she directed it at no one in particular. Mrs. Pritchard gave a stiff nod, as if she would not allow herself warmth. Edward stepped back. "Now I will leave," he said to Mary, as promised. Mary's voice came out rough. "Yes." Edward hesitated. It was not in his nature to walk away from a problem once he had touched it. Yet he saw the tight set of Mary's shoulders. He saw how she would carry this moment like a bruise. He turned toward the door. His attendant moved immediately to follow. "Your Highness!" Edward's head snapped slightly, warning in the motion. The attendant swallowed the rest of his sentence and stayed close anyway because that was his duty. Mary's breath shuddered. She stared at the counter, at the coin, at Mrs. Pritchard's hand closing around it. Mrs. Pritchard leaned forward, speaking under her breath to Mary. "Who is he?" Mary's voice was equally low. "I do not know." Mrs. Pritchard's eyes narrowed. "You do not know, yet he pays like a lord." Mary lifted her chin. "Many men have coins, few have sense." Mrs. Pritchard made a sound that could have been a laugh. "Sense does not keep a woman fed." Mary did not answer. She turned, bottle pressed against her side, and walked out. The street seemed louder now, or perhaps Mary simply heard it more because her heart was too full of many things at once. She walked quickly, but not running. Running would look guilty. She had repeated that rule so often it felt like scripture. Behind her, she heard the carriage door close. Wheels began to move. Edward, inside again, stared at his own gloved hand. "Your Highness," his attendant said carefully, "this was unwise." Edward did not look up. Was it? It invites attention, and attention invites talk. Edward's jaw tightened. Talk is the cheapest currency in London. Let them spend it. The attendant hesitated. "If the talk reaches the palace—" "It will," Edward said, and the certainty in his voice surprised even himself. He leaned back, eyes closing briefly. In his mind he saw Mary's face when she said, "Do not use my name." There was a dignity in it that had nothing to do with rank. It made him feel absurdly as if he had been the one examined. He opened his eyes again and looked out. Mary was still walking, bottle tucked close, baby held tight. She did not look back. That, more than anything, stirred something in him. She did not even care enough to watch him go. Edward should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt a hollowness, as if the street had swallowed the only honest moment of his morning. Mary turned a corner and nearly collided with a man stepping out from a doorway. She jerked back, careful not to jostle her baby. "Pardon," she said quickly. The man's eyes flicked over her, then past her shoulder. His gaze caught on the carriage just behind, the fine horses, the attendant. His face shifted with recognition, sharp and immediate. He drew in a breath, and his voice was low but clear, the way a man speaks when he thinks he is about to be rewarded for what he knows. "Your Highness." Mary's breath caught in her throat. The man who had nearly collided with her stood very still, eyes fixed past her shoulder, as if the street itself had become a stage. His coat was respectable, his cravat neatly tied, but his gaze carried the hunger of someone who lived on other people's news. "Your Highness," he said again, softer, reverent, and far too pleased with himself. Mary turned her head, just enough to see the carriage still rolling at a measured pace. The gentleman who had paid for her baby's milk sat inside it now. He was half in shadow, half in the pale light that slipped between buildings. His face was turned toward the window, and for a brief moment his eyes met hers. Mary's stomach dropped. He had not lied about being a gentleman. He had only neglected to mention that London would bow to him. Edward's attendant leaned forward out of the carriage door, voice low and sharp. "Mind your tongue." The man's mouth twitched. "I meant no offense. I meant respect." Edward lifted a hand, a small motion that silenced the attendant. Then Edward leaned forward slightly, looking at the man with calm that did not invite familiarity. "You recognize me," Edward said. The man bowed too deeply for the narrow street. "It would be difficult not to, sir." "And yet," Edward replied, "it would be wise to forget that you do." The man blinked as if he had expected reward, not warning. "Of course, sir, of course, only one is surprised to find your Highness in such a place." Edward's gaze did not flicker. "London is still London, even here." The man swallowed. His eyes darted to Mary, and the corner of his mouth lifted as if he had already written a story in his mind. Mary tightened her hold on her baby and stepped back. Edward's voice softened, not for the man, but because he had noticed Mary's movement. "Go on, Mrs. Whitfield." Mary's blood ran cold at the sound of her name in this man's mouth, spoken by this prince in the open street. She did not answer. She walked. Behind her she heard the man speak again, too late and too loud. "Mrs. Whitfield, is it? I only—" Edward's attendant cut him off. "You only mind your business." Mary did not look back. She would not be drawn into a conversation that could become proof of something she had not done. When she reached the next corner, she turned quickly and vanished into the flow of the city. Her baby made a small sound against her shawl. Mary whispered, urgent and trembling, "Hush, hush, my love. We shall be home." But home did not feel safe anymore. By the time she climbed the narrow stairs to her room, her arm ached from holding the bottle and the child. She set the bottle down on the small table and kept the baby pressed to her chest. Only then did she let out the breath she had been holding since the street. The door across the landing creaked open. Mrs. Sykes, her neighbour, leaned out with a face that always seemed to be looking for a reason to disapprove. "Well, Mrs." Sykes said, drawing out the word as if tasting it. "A fine morning for you, Mary." Mary did not turn. She pretended to busy herself with the baby's shawl. "Good morning." Mrs. Sykes stepped into the landing without invitation. Her eyes went straight to the bottle on Mary's table. "Milk," she said. "How fortunate." Mary's fingers tightened on the shawl's edge. "Yes." "And from where, may I ask, did fortune arrive?" Mary turned then, slowly, meeting Mrs. Sykes's gaze. "From a shop." Mrs. Sykes gave a thin smile. "A shop that gives without payment?" Mary's voice stayed even. "A shop that took payment." Mrs. Sykes leaned closer, lowering her voice with theatrical secrecy. "I saw a carriage down the street, Mary. A carriage not meant for our kind of stairs." Mary felt heat rise in her face. "Your eyes are sharp." "My eyes are alive," Mrs. Sykes replied. "And when my eyes see a carriage, my ears hear talk. And talk says a gentleman stopped you. A fine gentleman." Mary's heart pounded. "Talk is always hungry. It will eat anything." Mrs. Sykes's gaze flicked to the baby. "A gentleman might feed more than milk." Mary's voice sharpened. "Watch your tongue." Mrs. Sykes lifted her hands in mock innocence. I only speak what others will. Better you hear it here than on the street where kindness is less. Mary stepped closer. There was nothing. A man saw me in need. That is all. A man, Mrs. Sykes echoed. Just a man. Mary held her stare. Yes. Mrs. Sykes's expression shifted, irritation creeping in. Then why did you look like someone had died when you came up the stairs? Mary's throat tightened. She wanted to say, because I realized the world has teeth. Instead, she said, Move aside, Mrs. Sykes. My baby needs to eat. Mrs. Sykes lingered as if she could block milk with her body. Then she stepped back, still watching. Mary shut her door firmly. Not a slam. A firm close that said the conversation was over. Inside, her hands shook as she warmed the milk as best she could. She fed her baby slowly, watching his small mouth move, and tried to let the ordinary act calm her. But her mind kept returning to that man in the street. Your Highness. The thrill in his voice. When the baby finished, he relaxed against her, heavy with relief. Mary kissed his forehead. You must never be anyone's story, she whispered. Do you hear me? Never. A knock came at her door. Mary froze. Another knock. Gentler. She stood with her baby in her arms, listening. If it was Mrs. Sykes again, she would not answer. If it was the landlord, she would answer, because refusing him never ended well. A man's voice came through the thin wood. Mrs. Whitfield. Mary's breath caught. She did not recognize the voice. Yes, she called, careful. I am Reverend Collins, from St. Bartholomew's Parish. Mary frowned. She had been to church before, as a girl. As a woman, she had attended when she could, but work and exhaustion often won. What do you want, Reverend? She asked. No trouble, he said quickly. Only, may I speak to you for a moment? Mary hesitated, then opened the door a narrow crack, keeping her body in the way. The Reverend was middle-aged, plain-faced, with kind eyes that looked tired rather than superior. He held a small parcel in both hands, as if it mattered. Good day, he said. May I come in? Only for a moment. Mary did not step aside. I do not take parish handouts. His cheeks colored slightly. It is not a handout. Not from the parish, at least. Mary's eyes narrowed. Then from whom? He lowered his voice. A gentleman asked me to deliver it. He said you would not accept it from him directly. Mary felt the room tilt. A gentleman? The Reverend nodded, as if he understood her suspicion. He was polite. He insisted there be no fuss. He asked me to say that it is meant for the child, and that no one is to speak of it. Mary stared at the parcel. What is in it? Milk tickets, he said, for the dairy, and a small amount for coal. Not much, only enough to ease the week. Mary's throat tightened. I did not ask for it. I know, he said, and I do not press it upon you lightly, but I confess, when I saw your child, I thought, this is not pride that feeds him. Mary's jaw clenched. Are you preaching at me, Reverend? His eyes widened. No, forgive me, I only mean at the city is hard, and the child is innocent. Mary looked down at her baby, sleeping now, unaware. Her pride rose up like a wall, then cracked at the soft weight in her arms. She spoke through clenched teeth. If I take it, I will be expected to be grateful to the man who sent it. The Reverend shook his head. He said you owe him nothing, only to keep your child well. Mary's hands trembled. He said that. Yes, Mary's voice dropped. Do you know who he is? The Reverend hesitated. I believe I do. Mary's stomach tightened. Then you know why this is dangerous. The Reverend looked pained. Yes. Mary swallowed hard. Take it back. His brows drew together. Mrs. Whitfield? Take it back, she repeated more sharply. The baby stirred, making a soft sound, and Mary's resolve wavered against the real need that lived in her arms. The Reverend's voice gentled. If you refuse, you punish no one but your child. Mary's eyes stung. She blinked fast. Do not speak as if you know my life. I know enough, he said quietly. I know hunger. Not as you do, but I have seen it, and I have seen pride drive mothers to desperation. Mary held his gaze, furious at herself for needing any of this. Give it here, she said. Relief crossed the Reverend's face. He handed her the parcel with care, as if it were sacred. Mary did not thank him. She stepped back and shut the door. For a long time she stood with the parcel in her hand, feeling as though she had accepted a chain. That afternoon, as she walked to the pump to draw water, Mrs. Sykes was waiting near the stairwell. Her gaze went immediately to the parcel. Mrs. Sykes smiled. "Well, well." Mary tightened her grip. "Move." Mrs. Sykes leaned closer. "Who brings you parcels now, Mary? The parish? Or the palace?" Mary's voice came out low. "You saw nothing." Mrs. Sykes's eyes gleamed. "I saw enough." Mary stepped around her and went down the stairs. Her legs felt unsteady. She could feel eyes on her from behind doors and windows. At the pump, another woman paused beside her. Not Mrs. Sykes. Someone Mary barely knew. "You're Mary Whitfield, aren't you?" the woman asked with a strange blend of curiosity and caution. Mary kept her gaze on the water. "Yes." The woman's voice dropped. "They say a royal prince spoke to you." Mary's hands went still. "I don't know what you mean," Mary said. The woman lifted her brows. "Don't be offended, it's everyone's talking." Mary forced her arms to move again. "Then everyone has nothing to do." The woman gave a small laugh. "You can't stop talk, dear. Only choose how it finds you." Mary carried her water back upstairs with a tight jaw. By evening, the street did not feel like the same street. It felt like a room full of people waiting for her to speak. At the palace, talk travelled faster than Mary could walk. Edward stood in a quiet corridor, looking out through a tall window at the formal gardens he had never loved. The air smelled faintly of polish and order. A man approached with measured steps, the kind that never hurried and never hesitated. Lord Ashcombe bowed not deeply but correctly. His face was handsome in the way of men who knew they belonged to power. His eyes were sharp, though, and not kind. "Your Highness," Ashcombe said, voice pleasant, "you were seen this morning." Edward did not turn. "Was I?" Ashcombe moved to stand beside him, hands folded. "On a common street, at a dairy shop." Edward finally looked at him. "Are you accusing me of buying milk?" Ashcombe's smile was tight. "I am accusing you of being recognized while doing it." Edward's jaw tensed. "I did not ask to be recognized." Ashcombe's voice softened, almost sympathetic. "Recognition is the price of your birth. You cannot go where you please and expect the world to forget what you are." Edward's eyes narrowed. "What is it you want from me?" Ashcombe breathed out slowly. "I want you to understand the danger. A prince cannot attach his name to a woman from the slums. Not even by accident, not even by kindness." Edward's voice went cold. "I attached nothing. I paid a shopkeeper." Ashcombe's gaze held his. And by noon, the story had grown. By supper, it reached people who enjoy stories and who will use them. "There are ladies, Your Highness, who will take your simple coin and turn it into a chain around your throat." Edward stared at him. "You speak as though it is my fault." Ashcombe's lips pressed together. "It is your responsibility." Edward turned away, his hands tight at his sides. "She has a child." Ashcombe blinked, as if that detail were inconvenient. And the child needed milk." Ashcombe's tone remained calm. "Then you instruct your steward to fund a parish relief. You do not step into the street yourself. You do not allow your face to be part of the relief." Edward's gaze flashed. "My face was there because my eyes were there." Ashcombe tilted his head. "Your Highness is sounding sentimental." Edward's voice dropped. "Your Lordship is sounding empty." Ashcombe's eyes hardened for a moment, then softened into that practiced expression of patience. "I do not advise you for my own comfort. I advise you because the court is not forgiving. Lady Harrogate has already asked questions." Edward's stomach tightened. "Lady Harrogate." Ashcombe nodded. "She is concerned for your reputation, and she is skilled at disguising cruelty as concern." Edward's mouth tightened. "What questions?" Ashcombe's reply was smooth. "Who is the woman? Why you noticed her? Whether she has been seen before? Whether she is making a habit of being in your path?" Edward's eyes narrowed. "That is absurd." Ashcombe's voice stayed mild. "Absurd things are often the most useful." Edward turned, sudden decision sparking in him. "Then I will make it useful in a different way." Ashcombe's brows rose. "What do you mean?" Edward's jaw set. "If Lady Harrogate wishes to concern herself with the poor, she can do it honestly. not with whispers. Ashcombe's gaze sharpened. "Your Highness, do not provoke her. She has influence." Edward's voice went quiet. "So do I." Ashcombe watched him for a long moment, then sighed as if addressing a stubborn child. "At least let your influence move through proper channels." Edward's eyes did not move. "It is moving." Ashcombe's lips tightened. "How?" Edward did not answer, because he had already given instructions, quiet instructions, not to parade Mary Whitfield through the palace like a trophy of compassion, but to place help where she could reach it without having to come to him. Yet proper channels had their own eyes and tongues. 2 days later, Mary was mending a shirt for a woman who paid little but paid on time when Mrs. Sykes knocked again. This time, she did not lean. She entered without waiting. Mary looked up sharply. "You do not own my door." Mrs. Sykes's cheeks were pink with excitement. "They're calling names at the parish, Mary." Mary's hands stilled on the fabric. "What names?" "Yours," Mrs. Sykes said, as if the word tasted sweet. "They want you at the charity committee." Mary's stomach dropped. "I did not apply." Mrs. Sykes waved her hand. "You don't apply, they choose. Haven't you heard? Lady Harrogate is visiting. Fine ladies, good works, and your name is on the list." Mary's throat tightened. "Why would my name be there?" Mrs. Sykes gave her a look that was almost gleeful. "Because you've been noticed." Mary's fingers curled around her needle. "Get out." Mrs. Sykes did not move. "If you don't go, they'll say you're ungrateful, and ungrateful women get struck off lists they never asked to be on." Mary's jaw clenched. She hated the trap. If she went, she would be displayed. If she did not, she would be condemned. Her baby made a small sound from the cot. Mary looked at him, then back to Mrs. Sykes. "What time?" she asked flatly. Mrs. Sykes smiled. "This afternoon." Mary's voice was cold. "Then you may have your entertainment." "I will go. But if you follow me, I will turn and speak your name loud enough for every ear in the street." Mrs. Sykes's smile faltered. "I was only trying to help." Mary returned to her stitching with shaking hands. "Help yourself elsewhere." That afternoon, Mary wrapped her baby tight and walked to the parish hall with her head high and her stomach knotted. Inside, the hall was crowded with women, some poor, some respectable, and some who dressed respectable on purpose. At the front, a long table had been set. Behind it sat 3 ladies and 2 men with papers and ink. At the center sat Lady Harrogate. Mary recognized her from gossip more than sight, yet the woman's presence had a gravity that made Mary's skin prickle. Lady Harrogate's posture was perfect. Her smile was precise. Her eyes, however, were the eyes of someone who collected information like other women collected lace. A clerk at the side called names. "Mrs. Eliza Trent." A woman stepped forward, curtsied, and answered questions about her husband's wages, her rent, her number of children. Coins were allotted with brisk mercy. Mary watched, silent. Then the clerk called, "Mrs. Mary Whitfield." A murmur rippled through the hall. Mary felt it like a hand on the back of her neck. She stepped forward anyway. Lady Harrogate's gaze landed on her. It was not openly hostile. It was assessing, as if Mary were fabric being inspected for flaws. "Mrs. Whitfield," Lady Harrogate said, voice smooth, "how good of you to come." Mary curtsied, not deeply but properly. "My lady." Lady Harrogate's smile widened. "You carry your child yourself. How devoted." Mary kept her face still. "I have no nurse." "Of course not," Lady Harrogate replied, as if stating an expected fact. One of the other ladies leaned toward Lady Harrogate and whispered. Mary caught only a word. "Prince." Mary's stomach clenched. She kept her gaze forward. Lady Harrogate folded her hands. "Now, Mrs. Whitfield, we are here to ensure relief reaches those truly in need. It is a noble endeavor." Mary said nothing. Lady Harrogate tilted her head. "You are a widow, is that correct?" "Yes," Mary replied. "How long have you been widowed?" Mary's throat tightened. 2 years. "And your late husband's name?" Mary hesitated a fraction too long. "Samuel Whitfield." Lady Harrogate's brows lifted slightly, as if noting the hesitation. "What was his occupation?" "A clerk," Mary said. "Clerks can be respectable," Lady Harrogate mused. "And yet you are here." Mary's jaw tightened. Respectability does not pay rent when illness takes a man. Lady Harrogate gave a small nod, as if pleased by the answer's neatness. Illness. How unfortunate. One of the men at the table, older and bored, glanced at his paper. You are listed as receiving occasional parish bread. Mary kept her voice steady. When I can come for it, sir. Lady Harrogate's eyes flicked to the baby. And the child's name? Mary's fingers tightened around the shawl. Thomas. A sweet name, Lady Harrogate said, and his father is Mr. Whitfield. Mary's pulse hammered. Yes. Lady Harrogate's smile did not change. Naturally, the hall felt suddenly too warm. Mary could hear the whispering behind her, like dry leaves scraping stone. Lady Harrogate leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Whitfield, we have heard you have had... Attention. Mary's spine went rigid. Attention, my lady? The woman's voice remained gentle. A gentleman, perhaps. A patron. A benefactor. Mary's cheeks warmed. I have not sought any patron. Lady Harrogate's eyes shone with polite interest. Yet one found you. Mary's voice sharpened before she could stop it. My child was hungry. That is all. Lady Harrogate's gaze held hers. Of course, hunger makes us do many things. Mary's throat tightened. She forced her tone back under control. Hunger makes me work. And Lady Harrogate added softly, it makes some women accept gifts. Mary's hands trembled. If you mean to insult me, my lady, you may do it plainly and save us all time. A ripple went through the hall. A few women gasped as if Mary had thrown a stone in church. Lady Harrogate's smile stayed fixed, but her eyes sharpened. I do not insult Mrs. Whitfield. I inquire. Inquiry protects. A woman's reputation is fragile. Mary lifted her chin. Then do not handle mine. A silence fell, heavy and astonished. Lady Harrogate blinked slowly, as if savouring the moment. You have spirit. Mary's voice was low. I have necessity. One of the other ladies cleared her throat. Lady Harrogate is only ensuring that relief is not misused. Mary turned her gaze slightly toward that lady. Misused by whom? The lady's cheeks coloured. By those who are not honest. Mary returned her gaze to Lady Harrogate. My honesty is all I own. Lady Harrogate's expression softened, as if Mary had played her part beautifully. Yes, and it is a pity when honesty is surrounded by temptation. Mary's hands clenched. You are speaking in circles. Lady Harrogate nodded. Then let us speak plainly. Have you been in private conversation with the prince? The hall went still. Mary's breath stopped. For a heartbeat she could not move. Then she found her voice. No. Lady Harrogate's brows lifted. You deny it. Mary's eyes flashed. I deny that I sought him. I deny that I encouraged him. I deny that there is anything to deny beyond a man paying 2 pence for milk. Lady Harrogate's gaze stayed calm. 2 pence becomes a story when placed in the wrong hand. Mary swallowed. Then take the story out of it, my lady. Do not feed it. Lady Harrogate's smile thinned. Ah, but stories are fed whether we wish it or not. Mary shifted her baby, who stirred and fussed softly. She pressed her lips to his forehead to quiet him. Lady Harrogate watched the gesture closely. You are protective. Mary met her gaze. I must be. Protection, Lady Harrogate said, is a mother's duty, and it is society's duty as well. Mary's tone sharpened. Society has never protected me. Lady Harrogate gave a small sigh as if regret were a pastime. Perhaps not, but we can, if you allow it. Mary's stomach twisted. What do you mean? Lady Harrogate tapped the paper in front of her. We may grant a small allowance. We may arrange employment. We may even ensure your rent is steadied. Mary's throat tightened. You did not offer any of this before a prince looked my way. Lady Harrogate's eyes gleamed. You are observant. Mary's fingers clenched. I do not like being observed. Lady Harrogate's voice remained warm. Then help us, Mrs. Whitfield. Give us clarity, and we can give you peace. Mary's breath came shallow. Peace, at what price? Lady Harrogate held her gaze. At the price of truth. Mary's heart pounded. She had done nothing wrong. Yet she understood with terrible clarity that innocence did not matter as much as obedience. She spoke carefully. The prince spoke to me in the street. He paid a shopkeeper. He left. That is the whole truth. Lady Harrogate nodded slowly. And you have not seen him since? Mary hesitated. The parcel, the milk tickets, the Reverend. Those had not been direct contact, yet they were connected. Mary could almost hear Lady Harrogate's mind clicking into place, measuring any crack she could widen. I have not seen him, Mary said. Lady Harrogate's smile returned. Good. One of the men at the table coughed. Then we can proceed with relief. Mary's shoulders loosened a fraction, though her stomach still churned. Lady Harrogate glanced to her secretary, a woman with a composed face and a pen poised like a needle. Note, Mrs. Whitfield's case for review. Mary's eyes narrowed. Review. Lady Harrogate's voice was gentle. Only standard procedure. Mary's jaw tightened. I have answered your questions. And you answered well, Lady Harrogate said. But there are concerns to address privately. For your sake. Mary's pulse jumped. Privately. Lady Harrogate leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice as if offering kindness. Mrs. Whitfield, a prince's attention is not like any other. It casts light. Light can warm, or it can expose. We must ensure you are not harmed by it. Mary's voice was tight. I am harmed already. Lady Harrogate's eyes did not blink. Then you will welcome guidance. Mary's fingers trembled around the shawl. I welcome nothing that feels like a cage. Lady Harrogate's smile turned faintly amused. How dramatic. Mary held herself rigid. How honest. Lady Harrogate sat back. Very well. You may go, Mrs. Whitfield. Mary curtsied again, stiffly, and turned. The murmurs followed her as she walked away. She felt them stick to her dress like burrs. A woman near the door whispered to another, not quiet enough. Did you hear? The prince. Another replied, Poor thing, she will be ruined. Mary's face went hot. She kept walking. Outside, she took a breath that shook. She did not realize she had been holding her breath the entire time. Her baby fussed, and Mary whispered, Hush, Thomas. Mama is here. She had almost reached the street when someone called softly behind her. Mrs. Whitfield. Mary turned. The secretary from the table approached with careful steps, holding an envelope. The envelope was thick, expensive, sealed. Mary's stomach dropped. The secretary held it out. This is for you. Mary did not take it. From whom? Lady Harrogate, the secretary replied. You are requested to attend a private review of your case. Mary's voice went tight. I was reviewed. This is separate, the secretary said, polite as stone. And you are expected. Mary stared at the seal. A crest, pressed into wax. Elegant. Unmistakable. Her fingers finally reached for it, though they felt numb. Where? Mary asked, barely able to speak. Am I expected to go? The secretary answered calmly. To Lady Harrogate's townhouse tomorrow afternoon. And the crest on the seal told Mary exactly how close that house sat to the royal circle. Mary held the sealed envelope all the way home, as if it might try to escape her hand. At the stairs, Mrs. Sykes appeared as if summoned by the sight of wax. Another letter? She asked, eyes bright. How grand you've become. Mary did not stop. Move. Mrs. Sykes leaned in. From whom? Mary's voice stayed flat. From someone who does not know my life. Mrs. Sykes gave a small laugh. They know enough to send for you. Mary climbed the steps without looking back. Every step felt like walking toward a room where the air would be measured and found wanting. Inside, she set Thomas in his cot, then opened the envelope with hands that refused to be steady. The paper inside smelled faintly of something clean and expensive. Mrs. Mary Whitfield is requested to attend a private review of her case at Lady Harrogate's townhouse tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Requested. Expected. Summoned, in truth. Mary read it twice, then folded it so carefully it looked untouched. No, she whispered, though there was no one to argue with her except the world. Thomas made a small sound, and Mary turned at once, softening. I know, she murmured. I know. We will be quiet. We will be careful. We will not be swallowed. A knock came at her door again, lighter this time. Mary opened it a crack. Reverend Collins stood there, hat in hand, his expression uneasy. I feared I might find you troubled, he said. Mary kept the door half closed. Do you visit every mother you send parcels to? He winced. I did not mean to press myself upon you. Then why are you here? His eyes flicked to the folded letter in her hand. Because word travels quickly, and Lady Harrowgate's word travels fastest. Mary's throat tightened. So you know. I heard, he admitted, and I came to advise you. Mary's jaw set. Advise me to do what she says. No, he said quickly. Advise you to be cautious. Mary let out a short breath. Caution is my constant companion, Reverend. It has not protected me. He lowered his voice. May I come in? Only for a moment. Mary hesitated, then stepped aside. She did not offer him a chair. He did not ask for one. Reverend Collins looked around the small room without judgment, then looked at Mary as if choosing his words with care. Lady Harrowgate presents herself as Charity's champion, he said, but Charity can be used like a leash. Mary's hands tightened around the letter. She questioned me in front of everyone about the prince. The Reverend nodded. And now she wishes to question you in private. Mary's voice sharpened. So she may say whatever she wants afterward, and no one can contradict her. His mouth tightened. That is one danger. Mary's eyes narrowed. What is the other? He hesitated. That she means to discover what she can use. Mary swallowed. Use against whom? He did not answer at once. That silence was answer enough. Mary's cheeks warmed with anger. I have done nothing. I believe you, he said quietly. Mary's voice shook. Belief is not protection. No, he agreed. It is not. Mary turned toward the cot. Thomas slept, his small fist curled as if grasping something invisible. Reverend Collins followed her gaze. Will you go? Mary's shoulders rose and fell. If I do not go, she will call it ingratitude. She will spread it. He nodded. And if you go, she will attempt to shape you. Mary's eyes flashed. She cannot shape me. Reverend Collins's gaze held hers. She can shape what others believe. Mary's breath came shallow. Then what do you suggest? He spoke gently. Do not go alone. Mary's laugh was a single bitter sound. Who would go with me? Mrs. Sykes. The Reverend's lips pressed together. Not her. Someone who will not be frightened by fine rooms. Mary stared at him. You mean you? He nodded once. If you will allow it. Mary hesitated. Pride rose again. Then she looked at Thomas. All right, she said, voice tight, but you do not speak for me. I will not, he promised. I will only witness. Mary folded the letter and placed it in her apron pocket as if it were a weight she could not set down. The next day, at 2:30, Mary wrapped Thomas warmly and walked with the Reverend through streets that grew cleaner with each turning. The air changed. The faces changed. The glance of strangers changed too, becoming slower, more measuring. Mary kept her eyes forward. At Lady Harrowgate's townhouse, a servant opened the door before they could knock twice. His gaze went to Mary's clothes, then to the baby, then to the Reverend. Reverend Collins, the man said, surprised. The Reverend inclined his head. Good afternoon. The servant's mouth tightened as if he disliked surprises. Her ladyship expected Mrs. Whitfield. She has her, the Reverend replied calmly. And she has me as well. The servant hesitated, then stepped aside. This way. Mary followed, feeling every part of her body become too aware of her shoes on polished floors, too aware of her baby's small movements, too aware that every wall seemed to say, you do not belong. She was led into a sitting room where everything looked arranged for conversation that could ruin a person without raising a voice. Lady Harrowgate rose when Mary entered. Mrs. Whitfield, she said, smiling as if they were friends meeting for tea. How punctual, Mary curtsied. My lady. Lady Harrowgate's gaze flicked to the Reverend. The smile did not leave her mouth, but it sharpened at the corners. Reverend Collins, she said. How unexpected. He bowed his head slightly. Lady Harrowgate. Lady Harrowgate's eyes returned to Mary. Did you bring him? Mary's voice was steady. He offered to accompany me. Lady Harrowgate's smile widened. How protective of you. Mary held her gaze. How proper. Lady Harrowgate let out a soft laugh. Yes, proper. How we all cling to propriety when we feel uncertain. Mary's fingers tightened around Thomas. I came as requested. What do you want? Lady Harrogate gestured to a chair. "Sit, Mrs. Whitfield, please. The child as well. He must not be kept standing." Mary hesitated, then sat, careful, keeping Thomas close. Reverend Collins remained standing near the edge of the room, hands folded in front of him, calm as a stone in a river. Lady Harrogate sat opposite Mary. A secretary stood near a writing desk, pen poised. Another woman, older, sat in a corner with sewing, her presence like silent approval. Lady Harrogate folded her hands. "This will be very simple." Mary did not answer. Lady Harrogate tilted her head. "You were forthright yesterday. I admire that." Mary's jaw tightened. "You questioned me in front of strangers." Lady Harrogate sighed as if burdened by Mary's misunderstanding. "I questioned you in front of witnesses. There is a difference." Mary's eyes narrowed. "What difference?" "A witness," Lady Harrogate said softly, "can protect both parties. If the truth is spoken." Mary's voice sharpened. The truth was spoken. Lady Harrogate's eyes flicked to the Reverend, then back. Was it? Mary's stomach tightened. "Yes." Lady Harrogate's smile remained polite. "Then it will remain consistent now." Mary forced herself to breathe slowly. Thomas stirred, and Mary rocked him without thinking. Lady Harrogate watched the motion as if it were a tell. "Tell me again," Lady Harrogate said, "exactly what occurred at the dairy shop." Mary's throat tightened. "I went to buy milk. I was short. I returned it. I left." Lady Harrogate nodded. "And then?" Mary's fingers curled. "A gentleman spoke to me." "Which gentleman?" Lady Harrogate asked, as if she had not already chosen the answer. Mary's voice went colder. "A gentleman?" Lady Harrogate's eyes gleamed. "Mrs. Whitfield, you are in my home. We are not playing at coyness." Mary felt heat rise up her neck. "I am not coy, I am careful." "Careful," Lady Harrogate repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, a wise woman is careful. A wise woman does not invite attention from a prince." Mary's voice shook. "I did not invite it." "And yet it came," Lady Harrogate said. Mary's jaw clenched. "If a man speaks, must I be blamed for having ears?" Lady Harrogate's smile thinned. "If a prince speaks, a woman must be twice as wise." Reverend Collins spoke for the first time, voice calm. "Lady Harrogate, Mrs. Whitfield has already stated she did not seek the prince." Lady Harrogate turned her gaze to him, all warmth. "Reverend, how comforting it must be to believe words are enough." "They ought to be," he said evenly. Lady Harrogate returned her gaze to Mary. "After the prince spoke to you, what happened?" Mary's pulse quickened. She could not mention the parish parcel. She could not mention the tickets. Not if Lady Harrogate was hunting for a thread to pull. "He paid for milk," Mary said. "That is all." Lady Harrogate leaned forward slightly. "And you accepted it?" Mary's eyes flashed. "My child needed it." Lady Harrogate's gaze held hers. "How often does your child need it?" Mary's lips parted, then closed. She would not be baited into confessing need, as if it was sin. Lady Harrogate sat back. "Very well, let us speak of what followed. You received assistance." Mary's stomach tightened. Reverend Collins's gaze flicked to Mary, not warning but support. He would not betray her. He would not deny either if asked directly. That was the danger of having a witness. Mary kept her voice steady. "I received nothing from the prince." Lady Harrogate's brows rose. "Nothing." Mary swallowed. "Nothing directly." Lady Harrogate smiled as if Mary had handed her a coin. Ah, Mary's cheeks warmed with anger at herself. She had offered a crack. Lady Harrogate's voice stayed gentle. "So there were intermediaries." Mary's jaw clenched. "There was a reverend." Lady Harrogate's eyes flicked to Reverend Collins with faint amusement. "How noble." Reverend Collins's voice remained calm. "I delivered a parcel with milk tickets. That is all." Lady Harrogate nodded slowly. "And the parcel came from?" Reverend Collins did not waver. "A gentleman who wished to remain unnamed." Lady Harrogate's smile turned indulgent. "A gentleman. Always a gentleman. London is full of gentlemen when secrets are at stake." Mary's hands shook slightly. She tightened her hold on Thomas until she felt him settle. Lady Harrogate sighed. "Mrs. Whitfield, Do you understand what you risk? Mary's voice went low. I understand what you threaten. Lady Harrowgate's expression softened. Threaten? Such a harsh word. Mary lifted her chin. Then say what you mean, plainly. Lady Harrowgate's eyes brightened. I mean that if you are believed to have encouraged this inattention, you will be ruined. Not by me, by society, by women who cannot bear a prince's attention wandering where it should not, by men who will use you as proof that the prince is careless. Mary's throat tightened. And how do I prevent their belief? Lady Harrowgate's smile returned. By allowing me to guide you. Mary's stomach turned. Guide me into what? Lady Harrowgate's voice lowered as if offering kindness. Into silence. Into discretion. Into gratitude expressed in the correct direction. Mary stared. I have been discreet. I have been silent. Still you dragged me here. Lady Harrowgate's gaze hardened briefly. Because you are not the only one being watched. Mary's pulse jumped. Watched by whom? Lady Harrowgate's smile came back. By those who wish the prince to be spotless. Mary's mouth went dry. Then this is not about me. Lady Harrowgate's eyes gleamed. It is always about those with power, Mrs. Whitfield. The rest of us are merely consequences. Mary's nails pressed into her palm. I am not a consequence. I am a person. Lady Harrowgate tilted her head. How passionate. Mary's voice trembled, but she kept it steady. If you mean to make me disappear, say it. The secretary's pen scratched softly. Mary's skin crawled at the sound. Lady Harrowgate did not answer at once. She rose instead and walked to a small cabinet. She opened it and withdrew a thin folder. Mary's stomach tightened. Lady Harrowgate returned to her chair and placed the folder on the table between them. Mrs. Whitfield, she said, when one applies for relief, one invites scrutiny. Mary's voice went flat. I did not apply. Lady Harrowgate's smile did not falter. Nevertheless, your name arrived. And when names arrive, we examine. Mary stared at the folder. Examine what? Lady Harrowgate opened it. Papers, notes, a copy of Mary's parish record, a list of dates, a small neat summary of Mary's life reduced to ink. Mary's throat tightened. Her life did not look real on paper. It looked like a crime. Lady Harrowgate's finger tapped one page. Your husband was a clerk. Mary did not blink. Yes. Lady Harrowgate slid out a small envelope, old and worn, and set it beside the folder. Mary's breath stopped. She knew that envelope. She had kept it hidden under a loose floorboard, wrapped in cloth as if cloth could hide truth. How? Mary whispered before she could stop herself. How did you get that? Lady Harrowgate's eyes brightened at Mary's loss of composure. So you recognize it? Mary's hands trembled. Thomas stirred, sensing her tension. Reverend Collins shifted, his voice quiet but firm. Lady Harrowgate, where did you obtain private correspondence? Lady Harrowgate glanced at him. From her file. Mary's voice shook. It was not in any file. Lady Harrowgate's smile grew. Then perhaps you should ask yourself how much privacy you truly have. Mary's mouth went dry. You had someone in my room. Lady Harrowgate's expression stayed serene. Mrs. Whitfield, do not be dramatic. You live in lodgings with thin walls. Things are found, things are delivered, things are mislaid. London is such a careless place. Mary's vision narrowed. Her breath came short. Lady Harrowgate opened the envelope and drew out a folded paper. She smoothed it with delicate fingers. This, Lady Harrowgate said, is written by Samuel Whitfield. Mary's voice was barely audible. Yes, and this, Lady Harrowgate continued, mentions funds. Mary's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear her. Lady Harrowgate read a line aloud, her tone polite, almost bored. Mary heard her husband's words spoken by another mouth, and it felt like being touched without consent. Lady Harrowgate looked up. Samuel Whitfield believed that money meant for relief was being redirected. Mary's hands shook. He believed... Lady Harrowgate cut in gently. He wrote it. That is more than belief. Reverend Collins spoke, controlled anger in his voice. This is irrelevant to Mrs. Whitfield's need. Lady Harrowgate's gaze slid to him. Is it? Or does it make her inconvenient? Mary swallowed hard. My husband was honest. Lady Harrowgate's smile was thin. Honesty is admirable. It is also dangerous when pointed at the wrong people. Mary's voice trembled. He is dead. Lady Harrogate nodded as if acknowledging the weather. Yes. How unfortunate. Mary's eyes flashed. Do not speak of him like that. Lady Harrogate's voice remained smooth. I speak of consequences, Mrs. Whitfield. This letter suggests mismanagement, perhaps even impropriety. If such a letter were to circulate, it would cause embarrassment. Mary's stomach twisted. That is why you brought me here. Lady Harrogate tilted her head. Partly. Mary's breath came shallow. You want me to give it to you? Lady Harrogate's smile returned. You catch on quickly. Mary's fingers tightened around Thomas. No. Lady Harrogate's eyes sharpened. Mrs. Whitfield, you do not understand your position. Mary's voice rose, then steadied. I understand it perfectly. You want me to trade my husband's truth for my child's safety. Lady Harrogate's expression remained calm. I want you to trade a piece of paper for peace. Mary's eyes burned. Peace built on lies is not peace. Lady Harrogate sighed. Such moral fervour is wasted in a woman who cannot afford coal. Mary flinched. Reverend Collins stepped forward slightly. Lady Harrogate, he said, this is unchristian. Lady Harrogate's smile turned sweet. Reverend, do not preach at me in my own home. Mary's voice went low. You are afraid. Lady Harrogate blinked. Afraid. Mary held her gaze. If you were not afraid, you would not need my husband's letter. Lady Harrogate's eyes gleamed. Clever. Mary's hands trembled. And you are not clever. You are only powerful. Lady Harrogate leaned forward. Power is the only cleverness that matters. Mary's pulse hammered. She looked down at Thomas, then up again. I will not give you his words, Mary said, voice shaking but firm. You will not bury him a second time. Lady Harrogate's smile faded. For the first time, something colder showed beneath it. Then, Lady Harrogate said softly, I must protect the prince from you. Mary's breath caught. From me. Yes, Lady Harrogate replied, eyes bright with satisfaction. From your proximity, from your story, from your potential to become an inconvenience. A prince cannot be seen as a man who is moved by alleyway tragedies. It makes him look weak. Mary's voice was sharp. Moved by hunger is not weakness. Lady Harrogate's gaze narrowed. In your world, perhaps. In mine it is. Mary's hands shook. He chose to speak to me. Lady Harrogate's smile returned, chillier now. And he will choose to stop. The secretary's pen scratched again, faster. Mary's throat tightened. She turned her head slightly toward the Reverend, as if to anchor herself. Reverend Collins's voice was quiet. Mrs. Whitfield, breathe. Mary swallowed. She forced air into her lungs. Lady Harrogate tapped the letter. One more thing. Mary's eyes narrowed. What? Lady Harrogate's voice was silk. This letter suggests your husband had access to accounts. That means he had access to names. He worked in offices, did he not? Mary's stomach dropped. He did odd work, Lady Harrogate nodded. Odd work often puts a man in odd places. Tell me, Mrs. Whitfield, did your husband ever work for a household connected to the court? Mary's pulse surged. She could not answer. If she denied, she lied. If she admitted, she gave Lady Harrogate a hook. Lady Harrogate's eyes gleamed at the hesitation. There it is. Mary's voice came out hoarse. You have no right to ask me that. Lady Harrogate's smile widened. Oh, I have every right. You are in my home, and you are under my review. Mary's breath came shallow. Thomas fussed, and Mary rocked him, whispering, Hush, hush. Lady Harrogate leaned back. You may go now. Mary blinked. Go. Yes, Lady Harrogate said. I have learned what I needed. Mary stood slowly, legs unsteady. She held Thomas close and turned toward the door. Reverend Collins stepped beside her at once. As Mary reached the threshold, Lady Harrogate spoke, voice bright as if calling after a friend. Mrs. Whitfield. Mary paused. Lady Harrogate smiled. Tomorrow a committee will meet again. Your case will be discussed. I advise you to be cooperative, for your child's sake. Mary's jaw clenched. I have been cooperative. Lady Harrogate's eyes glittered. Not nearly enough. Mary left without curtsying. She could not do it. Her body refused. In the corridor, the servant avoided her gaze as if she carried contagion. Outside, the air felt too sharp. Mary walked quickly, almost stumbling once. Reverend Collins kept pace beside her. "Reverend," Mary said, breathless, "someone entered my room." He looked grim. "Or bribed someone who could." Mary's voice shook. "My husband's letter." I hid it. The Reverend's jaw tightened. "Lady Harrogate does not move alone. She has helpers who believe they serve order." Mary's eyes stung. "Order." He glanced at her. "Do you have any other papers?" Mary's breath caught. For an instant she thought of the small bundle under the floorboard she had never dared to throw away. A receipt, a list of sums her husband once copied, hands shaking, whispering that it was wrong. She had kept them because she had loved him, because she could not bear to destroy what he had trusted her with. "I have nothing," Mary lied, and hated herself for it. The Reverend watched her for a moment, then nodded, as if he understood why she could not tell him. "Then," he said, "be very careful tonight. Speak to no one. Answer no questions." Mary's laugh was thin. "In this city, questions find you." They reached her building. Mary climbed the stairs as if carrying more than her child. "Mrs. Sykes was waiting on the landing, eyes bright. "Well," she said, "how was the lady's house?" Mary stepped past her. "Move." Mrs. Sykes followed one step, lowering her voice. "Did they offer you anything?" Mary's voice was flat. "They offered me a lesson." Mrs. Sykes smirked. "And did you learn it?" Mary turned sharply. "Yes. I learned you will sell anything you can, including the peace of a mother." Mrs. Sykes's smile vanished. "Mind yourself." Mary's eyes flashed. "Mind yourself." She shut her door and slid the bolt, hands shaking. Thomas began to cry, sudden and sharp. Mary moved at once, warming milk, soothing him, whispering, "It's all right. It's all right." But it was not. Across the city, inside rooms that smelled of polish and power, Edward was being summoned. Lord Ashcombe stood before him with a polite expression that never reached his eyes. "Your Highness," Ashcombe said, "Lady Harrogate has expressed concern." Edward's jaw tightened. "She is always concerned." "She claims," Ashcombe continued, "that a poor widow has become entangled in your attention." Edward's gaze hardened. "Entangled. I paid for milk." Ashcombe tilted his head. "The word is not mine. It is hers. And she has framed it as protection of your name." Edward's voice went cold. "Protection or control?" Ashcombe sighed. "Call it what you wish. It has become a matter of court conversation." Edward's hands clenched. "What has she done?" Ashcombe's eyes narrowed slightly. "She has called the woman for private review." Edward's pulse jumped. "Private?" Ashcombe nodded. "And she is asking questions about the woman's past." Edward stared at him. "Why?" Ashcombe's mouth tightened. "Because Lady Harrogate enjoys holding the thread while others dangle." Edward turned away, anger sharp and clean. "Where is this townhouse?" Ashcombe hesitated. "Your Highness?" Edward spun back. "Where?" Ashcombe gave the address reluctantly, like a man handing over a blade of information he wished to keep hidden. Edward did not wait. He moved at once, not with theatrical haste, but with the focus of a man who had finally found something worth disobeying for. By the time Edward arrived at the townhouse, Mary had already been dismissed. The servant at the door stiffened when he saw the prince. "Your Highness," the man stammered. Edward did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Lady Harrogate, now." The servant hesitated, then stepped aside in fear of what refusing would mean. Lady Harrogate appeared in the sitting room with surprise shaped into grace. "Your Highness," she said, curtsying with perfect ease. "What an honor." Edward's eyes were calm, but something in them made the air tighten. "I am told you summoned a woman here," Edward said. "A widow, with a child." Lady Harrogate's smile stayed gentle. "I summoned Mrs. Whitfield, yes." "Out of concern." Edward's jaw tightened. "Concern looks very much like interrogation when it is done behind closed doors." Lady Harrogate lifted her brows. "Is your Highness suggesting I behaved improperly?" Edward stepped closer. "I am asking what right you have to weigh her character like a merchant weighs meat." Lady Harrogate's smile thinned. "Your Highness, I am protecting you." "I did not ask to be protected from kindness," Edward replied. Lady Harrogate's eyes gleamed. Kindness can be manipulated. Edward's gaze sharpened. By whom? Her or you? Lady Harrogate let out a soft laugh. How severe? Edward's voice was low. Where is she? Lady Harrogate spread her hands. Gone home, of course. I did not harm her. Edward's eyes narrowed. What did you show her? Lady Harrogate's smile turned faintly amused. Do you mean what evidence crossed my table? Edward's posture went still. Evidence? Lady Harrogate's gaze held his. Your Highness, do not be naive. When a poor woman comes close to royalty, the question is not whether she intends harm. The question is what harm will come simply by proximity. Edward's voice went colder. You speak as if she is a disease. Lady Harrogate's smile remained. I speak as if she is human, and humans are complicated, especially those who have nothing to lose. Edward's hands tightened. She has a child. She has everything to lose. Lady Harrogate leaned forward slightly. Then you understand why she must be guided away from you. Edward stared at her. No, I understand why you want her frightened. Lady Harrogate's eyes glittered. I want her quiet. Edward's jaw set. You will not touch her again. Lady Harrogate's smile did not falter. Your Highness, I do not touch. I advise. Edward took a slow breath. Then advise yourself this. If you use your influence to harm her, you will answer to me. So Lady Harrogate's eyes widened a fraction, then softened into a practiced look of humility. As you command. Edward held her gaze a moment longer, then turned sharply and left. Outside, his attendant caught up, anxious. Your Highness, this is unwise. Edward did not slow. So is cruelty dressed as virtue. His carriage rolled away, and the street swallowed the townhouse again as if nothing had happened. But Edward could not swallow what he had learned. Mary Whitfield had been pulled into a room of polished smiles because he had paid for milk. Back in her small room, Mary sat on the edge of her bed with Thomas asleep against her shoulder. She stared at the floorboards. She could feel the place where she had hidden things, the place that no longer felt hidden. She whispered, Samuel, what have they taken from us? A soft knock came at her door, not Mrs. Sykes's impatient rap, something quieter. Mary froze, then stood slowly. Who is it? She called. No answer, only the creak of a step moving away. Mary opened the door and found nothing in the hallway except a folded paper placed carefully on the floor. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. No seal, no crest, just a plain page with neat handwriting. She unfolded it. It was not addressed to her, it was addressed to him. Your Highness. Mary's breath caught. She read the line once, then again, her stomach turning with dread. She heard her own whisper as if from far away. They're not threatening me, she said. They're threatening you. Across the city, in Edward's private rooms, a servant delivered a small note on a silver tray. Edward dismissed the servant at once and opened it alone. The message was short, written in a hand meant to look ordinary. Choose, Your Highness, her silence or her ruin. Edward read the note twice, then a third time, as if different words might appear if he stared hard enough. Choose, Your Highness, her silence or her ruin. He set it down on his desk with slow care. His fingers stayed on the paper a moment, as if holding it could prevent it from becoming real. His attendant hovered by the door. Shall I call Lord Ashcombe at once, sir? Edward did not look up. No. The attendant hesitated. Your Highness, this may be a threat. It is a threat, Edward said quietly. Then we must find who... Edward lifted his gaze, and the attendant fell silent. How you will do nothing, Edward said. Not a word to the corridors, not a word to the servants' hall, not a word to the men who like to feel useful by spreading fear. The attendant swallowed. Yes, sir. Edward stood. Send for Reverend Collins. The attendant blinked. A clergyman, yes. And shall I send for Lady Harrogate as well? Edward's mouth tightened. No. The attendant took a careful breath. Your Highness, if you intend to protect the woman, I intend to protect the truth, Edward replied. If that also protects her, so much the better. The attendant bowed and left. Edward crossed the room and looked out the window, not at the gardens, but at the invisible city beyond them. He saw Mary's face in his mind, the controlled anger, the pride that refused to bend even when hunger pressed. He spoke aloud, as if to the empty air. They want her silent. A knock came. Edward turned. Enter. Lord Ashcombe stepped in, already composed, already watchful. He had the look of a man who never walked into a room without knowing what could be lost. You summoned me, Ashcombe said. Edward held up the note. Ashcombe took it, read it, then handed it back with a calm that felt practiced. I feared it would come to this. Edward's jaw tightened. You feared. I expected, Ashcombe corrected. Lady Harrowgate does not tolerate uncertainty. If she cannot control a narrative, she breaks it. Edward folded the note once and put it away. Who sent it? Ashcombe's eyes narrowed. Not Harrowgate herself. She prefers her hands clean. Then who? Ashcombe hesitated. Any number of people eager to please her. Edward stepped closer. Names. Ashcombe held his gaze. Your Highness, if I give names without proof, I become part of the game. Edward's voice went low. We are already in the game. Ashcombe exhaled slowly. Then the safest move is to remove the woman from the board. Edward's eyes sharpened. No. Ashcombe's mouth tightened. Send her away. Give her a cottage somewhere. Pay for it quietly. She will have her child, her peace, her milk, and your name will not be dragged through drawing rooms. Edward's voice was cold. You speak as if she is luggage. Ashcombe's tone stayed smooth. I speak as if she is vulnerable. Edward's hands curled. Vulnerable to what? To whispers, Ashcombe said. To committees. To charity women who smile while they cut. To men who decide a mother's respectability is a public matter. Edward stared at him. So your answer is exile. My answer is protection, Ashcombe insisted. Edward shook his head once. Protection that costs her dignity is not protection. It is purchase. Ashcombe's eyes narrowed. Then what do you intend? Edward did not flinch. I intend to stop the people who think they can ruin a woman to discipline a prince. Ashcombe gave a short, humorless breath. That is a noble intention. It is an overdue one. Ashcombe stepped closer, voice lower. Your Highness, the Crown expects you to be careful. Edward met his gaze. Then the Crown should have raised me among people, not among portraits. Ashcombe's expression softened briefly, then hardened again. You are angry. Edward's voice dropped. I am ashamed. I saw hunger and thought a coin could fix it. I did not see the jaws behind the coin. Ashcombe's gaze flicked away. If you insist on this course, you must do it properly. Edward nodded. That is why I sent for Reverend Collins. Ashcombe's brows lifted. A clergyman will not shield you from politics. No, Edward said, but he will shield her from being alone. A second knock came. Edward turned. Enter. Reverend Collins stepped in, hat in hand. He looked uncomfortable among gilded walls, but he did not shrink. Your Highness, he said, bowing his head. Edward moved toward him at once. Thank you for coming. The Reverend glanced at Ashcombe, then back. I confess I did not expect to be called to the palace. Edward's voice was steady. I should have called sooner. You delivered a parcel to Mrs. Whitfield. Yes, Reverend Collins replied carefully. And you attended her interview with Lady Harrowgate. The Reverend's jaw tightened. Yes. Edward took a breath. I have received a threat. Ashcombe's eyes flicked to Edward sharply, but Edward did not look at him. Reverend Collins did not pretend surprise. About her, Edward nodded once. About her ruin. The Reverend's face tightened with quiet anger. Then you see what she faces. I do, Edward said, and I intend to stop it. Ashcombe cut in, voice measured. Your Highness intends to stop it without creating a larger scandal. Edward's gaze snapped to him. Yes. Reverend Collins spoke, calm. Then you must act through legitimacy. Edward turned back to the Reverend. Tell me what you advise. The Reverend's eyes were steady. Meet Mrs. Whitfield in a place that does not belong to Lady Harrowgate. A parish room, a chapel, somewhere ordinary, where the truth does not feel like a guest. Edward nodded. Arrange it. The Reverend hesitated. Your Highness, if she believes you are the cause of her suffering, she may refuse. Edward's mouth tightened. Then I will accept her refusal, but I will not let her face this alone. Ashcombe's voice turned cautious. And what will you do about Lady Harrowgate? Edward answered without hesitation. I will take her favorite weapon away. The narrative, Ashcombe murmured. Edward nodded. If she uses charity as leverage, then charity must be examined. Ashcombe's eyes narrowed. You intend an inquiry? I intend oversight, Edward replied. Reverend Collins's brows lifted slightly. That will anger her. Edward's voice was quiet. She is already angry. It is only the direction that changes. Ashcombe let out a slow breath. If you do this, you must be prepared for resistance. Edward looked at him. I am prepared to be disliked. Ashcombe's mouth tightened. Disliked is not the same as undermined. Edward's gaze did not move. Then let them try. Reverend Collins glanced between them. Your Highness, shall I send word to Mrs. Whitfield? Yes, Edward said, and tell her I will not meet her alone. You will be present, and she may bring her child. The Reverend nodded. I will go at once. When the Reverend left, Ashcombe stepped closer, voice low. You are entangling yourself. Edward's eyes flashed. No, I am untangling her. Ashcombe's gaze held his. And if she refuses your help, Edward's jaw clenched. Then I will help without asking permission to be decent. Ashcombe shook his head slightly, as if Edward were a storm he could not stop. Very well. If you insist on oversight, I can draft the proper request. Edward's expression turned sharp. You will. Ashcombe paused. You trust me. I trust your love of order, Edward replied. Use it for something worthwhile. Ashcombe gave a reluctant nod. As you wish. That evening in Mary's lodging, a knock came that made her whole body tighten. Mrs. Sykes's voice floated through the door. Mary, open up. Mary did not move. Mrs. Sykes knocked again. Mary, I know you're in there. Don't be foolish. Mary's voice came out flat. Go away. Mrs. Sykes huffed. If you won't open for me, open for the Reverend. He's on the stairs. Mary froze. Reverend Collins's voice followed, calm and firm. Mrs. Whitfield. Mary hesitated, then opened the door a narrow crack. Reverend Collins stood there, and behind him Mrs. Sykes lingered like a moth near flame. Mary looked only at the Reverend. What now? He lowered his voice. A message. Mrs. Sykes leaned in. From who? Mary's eyes flicked to her, sharp. Not from you. Reverend Collins cleared his throat. Mrs. Whitfield, the Prince requests a meeting. Mary's stomach dropped. No. The Reverend lifted his hand slightly. Hear me. It will not be private. I will be present. Mary's voice shook. His presence ruins me. The Reverend's expression tightened. Others are already attempting to ruin you. He wants to stop it. Mary's fingers curled around the edge of the door. By offering more coins, more parcels, more reasons for people to stare. Reverend Collins shook his head. By placing his name where Lady Harrowgate cannot twist it. Mary's chest tightened. That sounds like a speech. It is a plan, the Reverend insisted. He received a threat. Mary went still. A threat. The Reverend nodded. He believes it concerns you. Mrs. Sykes made a little sound. A threat. Well, imagine that. Mary's gaze snapped to her. Go inside your own room, Mrs. Sykes. Mrs. Sykes crossed her arms. I live here too. Mary's voice went colder. Then live quietly. Mrs. Sykes's eyes narrowed. Then she took a step back, muttering as she went. Fine. Keep your secrets. When she was gone, Mary looked back at the Reverend. Where? Mary asked. Does he want to meet? At the parish, Reverend Collins replied. In the small sitting room behind the chapel. Tomorrow morning. Mary's jaw tightened. Morning. The earlier the better, the Reverend said. Fewer eyes. Mary stared at him a long moment. If I go, it becomes a story again. If you do not go, he said gently, they will write the story without you anyway. Mary's throat tightened. And if I go, what does he want from me? The Reverend met her gaze. He wants you safe. Mary's laugh was small and strained. Safety is expensive. Yes, Reverend Collins said, but this time the cost may be paid by someone who has more than pride to spend. Mary's eyes stung. She blinked fast. Tell him I will come for one meeting, and then I want my name out of his mouth. Reverend Collins nodded. I will tell him. The next morning, Mary wrapped Thomas tightly and walked with the Reverend through streets that still made her stomach knot. She kept her eyes down, but she could feel the city watching anyway. In the parish sitting room, the air was plain and cool. A small table, 2 chairs, nothing to impress anyone. Edward stood near the window. When Mary entered, he turned at once. He did not smile. He did not attempt charm. He looked unsettled, as if he had not slept. Mary stopped just inside the door. Reverend Collins closed it behind her and remained a few steps away, arms folded loosely, watching. Edward spoke first. "Mrs. Whitfield." Mary's voice was tight. "Your Highness." Edward flinched at the title. "Please, do not say it here." Mary's eyes narrowed. "Then why did you come here?" Edward took a breath. "Because someone threatened me." Mary's mouth went dry. "I know." Edward's gaze sharpened. "You received something as well." Mary held Thomas closer. "Yes." Edward's jaw tightened. "Then they are attempting to use you to discipline me." Mary's voice trembled. "And I am the one who will bleed for it." Edward stepped forward, then stopped himself, as if remembering he could not crowd her. "I am sorry." Mary's eyes flashed. "Sorry does not change what they've done." "No," Edward said, "but I intend to change what they can do next." Mary held his gaze, suspicious. "How?" Edward's voice was steady, careful. "Lady Harrogate uses charity as a leash. I am placing that leash under inspection." Mary stared. "Inspection by whom?" Edward's eyes flicked to Reverend Collins briefly, then back. "By a committee with authority. Accounts, records, proper oversight." Mary's throat tightened. "You want to shame her." Edward shook his head. "I want to stop her from using the poor as props." Mary's hands trembled. "And I will be a prop in your inspection." Edward's expression tightened. "No, you will not be dragged into it publicly." Mary's voice rose. "I have already been dragged." Edward's reply was quiet. "Not again." Mary swallowed hard. Thomas stirred, fussing. Mary rocked him, whispering without looking down, "Hush, Mamma's here." Edward watched the motion, and something in his eyes softened. "Is he well?" Edward asked. Mary's mouth tightened. "He will be, if the city allows it." Reverend Collins stepped forward slightly. "I can arrange Dr. Hensley to visit today, Your Highness, discreetly, with proper payment from the parish fund." Mary snapped, "I do not want doctors out of pity." Reverend Collins answered calmly, "Not pity, prudence." Edward's voice was gentle. "Let him come, Mrs. Whitfield." Mary's eyes flashed. "You are not his father." The words hung in the air, sharp and raw. Edward did not recoil. He only nodded once. "No, I am not. But I have eyes. And I have a conscience. And that makes me responsible for what my presence has stirred." Mary's throat tightened. "Then leave London. That will solve it." Edward's jaw set. "It will solve it for me, not for you. Lady Harrogate would still be Lady Harrogate." Mary's hands shook. "What do you want from me?" Edward took a slow breath. "I want you to tell me the truth." Mary's eyes narrowed. "I have told it." Edward's voice remained calm. "Not all of it." Mary went still. Edward's gaze held hers. "She showed you a letter from your husband." Mary's stomach dropped. "Yes." Edward's eyes sharpened. "And she took it." Mary's voice went hoarse. "Yes." Edward's jaw tightened. "Do you have anything else?" Mary's fingers curled. For a moment she saw her husband's face in her mind, tired and earnest, whispering, "Keep it safe, Mary. If anything happens to me, keep it safe." Mary's mouth trembled. "Why?" Edward's voice softened. "Because if there are records that prove mismanagement, Lady Harrogate cannot keep using you as a warning. And if she cannot use you, she will have to stop trying." Mary stared at him. "You want my husband's papers?" "I want his truth protected," Edward said. "And yours." Mary's eyes stung. "Truth has never protected me." Edward's voice dropped. "Then let it protect you now." Mary looked at Reverend Collins, then back at Edward. Her pride rose like a shield, then lowered, not for Edward but for Thomas. "I have something," Mary admitted quietly. "Not much. Copies, notes, receipts." Edward did not move, as if afraid to spook her into silence again. "Will you give them to Reverend Collins?" Mary shook her head. "No." The Reverend's brows lifted slightly. Mary's voice was firm. "No offense, Reverend, but papers vanish around me. I will not risk it." Edward nodded. "Then give them to me." Mary's eyes narrowed. So they can vanish in the palace. Edward met her gaze. So they can be locked in a place Lady Harrowgate cannot reach. Mary's breath came shallow. And, in return, Edward's answer came at once. In return, I will ensure no one threatens you again under my name. Mary's voice trembled. You cannot control society. I cannot, Edward agreed. But I can control what is done in my shadow. Mary studied him. Then she spoke, low. If I do this, you do not get to walk away when it becomes inconvenient. Edward's jaw tightened. I am already inconvenient. Mary's lips pressed together. That is not an answer. Edward's voice went quiet and utterly steady. I will not abandon you. Silence fell. Even Thomas seemed to settle as if listening. Mary looked down at her baby, then back up. All right, she said, but not today. Today I will not lead anyone to my floorboards. Edward nodded. Then tomorrow, and Reverend Collins will come with you and I will come with him, and we will do it quietly. Mary's shoulders tightened. Quietly does not exist anymore. Edward's mouth tightened. We will build it. Reverend Collins cleared his throat softly. Mrs. Whitfield, may I ask something? Mary looked at him warily. What? The Reverend's voice was gentle. Do you have enough for today? For bread? For coal? Mary's pride flared. I will manage. Edward did not argue. He simply reached into his coat and placed something on the table. Mary's eyes snapped to it. No. Edward's voice was calm. Not a coin. Mary stared. It was a small card, plain, without a crest. The writing was neat. It is an arrangement, Edward said. With the dairy shop, a weekly allowance paid through the parish. Your name is not on it. Only Reverend Collins's. Reverend Collins's brows lifted. Your Highness. Edward cut him off quietly. It is proper. It is discreet. It does not attach her to me. Mary's throat tightened. And you think that fixes it? No, Edward said, but it feeds him without forcing you to bargain with pride. Mary's fingers trembled. She did not pick up the card. You think you understand pride, she whispered. Edward's gaze held hers. I understand loneliness. Pride is often how loneliness dresses itself. Mary's breath caught. For a moment she could not speak. Reverend Collins looked away, giving them that small mercy. Mary's voice came out softer than she intended. I did not ask to be noticed. Edward's reply was immediate. Neither did I, but I noticed you. Mary's eyes stung, and she hated it. Do not speak like that, she said, harsher to hide what she felt. It sounds like poetry, and poetry does not buy coal. Edward's lips twitched faintly, not a smile, but something close. Then I will speak in plain terms. I will stop them. Mary's jaw tightened. How? Edward's voice turned practical. First, the doctor will see the child. Second, the dairy credit stands through the parish. Third, Ashcombe will draft oversight for Lady Harrowgate's fund and I will sign it. Fourth, you will give me your husband's copies. Mary stared. And if she retaliates? Edward's eyes sharpened. Then she does it against me, not you. Mary's voice trembled. That is what I fear. That she will crush you and call it virtue. Edward's gaze did not waver. Let her try. Reverend Collins stepped closer. Your Highness, one more thing. Mrs. Whitfield's neighbour is curious. Mary's mouth tightened. Mrs. Sykes. Edward nodded once. Curiosity thrives on gaps. Give her nothing. Mary let out a bitter breath. She will invent. Edward's voice stayed steady. Then let her invent without your participation. Mary's shoulders rose and fell. You speak as if this is simple. Edward's answer was soft. No. I speak as if you are not alone. Mary's grip tightened on Thomas. Her voice lowered. If you keep saying that, I might believe you. And belief is dangerous. Edward's eyes softened. So is despair. A quiet pause settled in the room. Not comfortable, but less sharp than before. Reverend Collins cleared his throat again. Shall I fetch Dr. Hensley? Mary hesitated. Then she nodded once. Yes, for the child. Edward's voice gentled. Thank you. Mary stood, adjusting Thomas against her shoulder. Do not follow me to the street. Edward nodded at once. I will not. Mary moved toward the door, then paused and looked back as if the words were pulled from her despite herself. "If you truly mean to inspect her accounts," Mary said, "she will not forgive it." Edward's voice was calm. "I am not asking her forgiveness." Mary swallowed. "And if the court turns on you?" Edward's gaze held hers. "Then for once, I will know what it is to stand somewhere honest." Mary stared at him a moment longer, then opened the door. Reverend Collins followed her out, leaving Edward alone in the plain room. Edward looked at the small card on the table, then at the empty chair where Mary had sat. He spoke softly, as if to himself. Her silence, or her ruin? He shook his head once, decisive. "Neither," he said, and for the first time in days, the word felt like a door opening instead of a wall closing. Mary did not sleep, not because Thomas was restless. He slept better than he had in days, warm and full, his little hand opening and closing as if practicing trust. It was Mary who lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for the smallest sound on the landing. At dawn, she rose, moved a chair, and knelt by the loose floorboard. Her fingers found the edge, then hesitated. Samuel's voice lived in her memory, gentle and urgent. "Keep it safe, Mary. If anything happens, keep it safe." Her throat tightened. "It has happened," she whispered. "And I'm still here." She lifted the board. The bundle was wrapped in cloth tied with a ribbon that had once been part of her hair. She undid it with trembling hands. Papers, folded small, a receipt, a list of sums, a note in Samuel's handwriting, cramped but clear, naming nothing directly, and yet saying everything to anyone who knew how to read between the lines. She swallowed hard and pressed the cloth to her lips for a heartbeat, as if she could kiss him through it. Then she folded everything back, placed it in her apron, and set the floorboard down again. A knock came. Mary went still. Reverend Collins's voice drifted through the door. "Mrs. Whitfield, it is I." Mary exhaled and unbolted the door. Reverend Collins stood there, calm, and beside him stood Edward, not in palace finery, in a plain coat, hat in hand, as if he had learned the first rule of mercy. Do not arrive like a spectacle. Mary's heart kicked hard anyway. Edward looked at her, then immediately at Thomas's cot. "Did I wake him?" Edward asked quietly. Mary shook her head once. "No." Reverend Collins stepped aside. "May we enter?" Mary's fingers tightened on the door. "If anyone sees him here—" Edward's voice was steady. "No carriage, no attendant at the stairs, only us." Mary stared at him, searching for the mistake in his plan, for the arrogance hidden under simplicity. She found none. She stepped back. "Come in." Edward entered and stopped as if he did not wish to crowd her space. His gaze moved briefly over the small room, then returned to Mary's face with something like respect. "I am sorry," he said again, as if the word had not lost meaning for him. Mary's mouth tightened. "Words are easy." "Yes," Edward replied. "So today I intend actions." Reverend Collins held out his hand. "Mrs. Whitfield." Mary pulled the bundle from her apron and held it tight to her chest. She did not hand it over. Edward did not reach for it either. He only said, "I will not take it from you." Mary's eyes flashed. "Then how do you plan to use it?" Edward nodded once, acknowledging the question as fair. "You will place it in my hand when you choose, and Reverend Collins will witness it, and we will write a short statement together, signed by him, that you gave copies voluntarily." Mary's throat tightened. "So you cannot later claim it was stolen." Edward's gaze held hers. "So no one can." Mary's fingers trembled around the cloth. "Lady Harrowgate already stole one letter." Reverend Collins's jaw tightened. "Which is why we do this properly." Mary looked at Thomas, sleeping peacefully, then back at Edward. "You promised," she said. Edward's voice was quiet. "I did." Mary swallowed, then held out the bundle. Edward stepped forward slowly and took it as if it were fragile. He did not open it. He did not glance inside. He simply held it with care. Reverend Collins brought out a folded sheet and ink from his bag, as though he had come prepared for Mary's fear. "I will write," he said. "Mrs. Whitfield, speak the words you wish." Mary's voice was tight. "Write that these are copies made by my husband. Write that they were kept in my possession. Write that I hand them over for protection, not for gossip." Reverend Collins nodded and wrote quickly. Edward watched Mary as if memorizing her face, not the papers. When the statement was written, Reverend Collins read it aloud. Mary corrected one phrase. Edward corrected nothing. Then Reverend Collins held out the pen. Mary stared at it as if it were heavier than any coin. Edward's voice softened. "You may refuse." Mary's eyes lifted. "And if I refuse, what becomes of us?" The word us slipped out before she could stop it. Edward's breath caught just once. Reverend Collins looked down at the paper again, giving them the decency of pretending he had not heard. Mary's cheeks warmed, angry with herself. Edward's voice was gentle, but steady. "If you refuse, I will still push for oversight, but it will take longer, and it will be easier for them to twist." Mary nodded once, then took the pen. Her signature was careful, not pretty, but firm. Reverend Collins signed next. Edward signed last, his name looking like something meant for proclamations, and yet it sat there under Mary's plain letters without crushing them. Reverend Collins folded the statement and tucked it away. Done. Mary released a breath she did not know she held. Edward finally looked down at the bundle in his hands. "Thank you." Mary's voice turned sharp again to protect her softness. "Do not thank me. Make it worth it." Edward met her gaze. "I will." Thomas stirred, making a small sound. Mary moved at once, lifting him gently. He blinked up at her, then yawned as if the world were still safe. Edward's expression changed at the sight, something tender and pained at once. Mary noticed. She hated that she noticed. "You may go now," she said too quickly. Edward did not move. "First, the doctor." Mary's jaw tightened. "You said he would come discreetly." "He will," Edward promised, "and he will not report to anyone but Reverend Collins." Reverend Collins nodded. "Doctor, Hensley will be here within the hour." Mary looked at the Reverend, then back at Edward. "And you?" Edward's voice was calm. "I will leave before he arrives. I do not wish my presence to turn a medical visit into rumor." Mary stared at him, surprised by his restraint. Edward hesitated, then added, "But I will return later." Mary's grip tightened on Thomas. "Why?" Edward's gaze held hers. "Because we have begun something, and beginning demands finishing." Mary's throat tightened. She did not trust herself to answer. Edward bowed his head slightly. "Until later, Mrs. Whitfield." He turned to go. Mary's voice followed him, quiet and unwilling. "Do not bring trouble to my door." Edward paused at the threshold and looked back. "I will bring only truth," he said, "and if trouble follows truth, then trouble will have to learn to live with it." He left. Mary shut the door and leaned her forehead against it for one long moment. Thomas made a small hungry sound, and Mary turned to him instantly. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, my love. Mama is here." The days that followed moved quickly, not with peace, but with motion. Dr. Hensley came and examined Thomas with gentle hands and a serious face. "He is small," the doctor said, "but he is not failing. Keep him warm. Feed him steadily. No long gaps." Mary's eyes flicked to Reverend Collins. "I do." Dr. Hensley nodded, then continue. "And if anyone tells you a mother must prove her worth before her child is allowed health, send them to me." Reverend Collins coughed softly, hiding a smile. Mary almost smiled too, but stopped herself. Then came the parish committee again, and this time Mary was not called to the front like a specimen. Reverend Collins attended in her place, calm and firm, speaking of Thomas's needs and Mary's work without allowing the conversation to drift into gossip. Lady Harrowgate's secretary watched him with thinly veiled irritation, and then, in the quiet way that ruins careful villains, letters began to arrive in the right hands. Not letters full of romance, letters full of questions, proper questions. Who authorized this sum? Where did this allotment go? Why does this ledger show one figure while the receipts show another? Lady Harrowgate, who had once made rooms bend to her, found herself answering to rooms that did not need her approval. Mary heard whispers on the stairs anyway. Mrs. Sykes cornered her one morning with a grin too eager to be kind. "They say Lady Harrowgate is furious," Mrs. Sykes whispered. "They say you've caused quite the stir." Mary kept her voice even. "I have caused nothing." Mrs. Sykes's eyes glittered. "They say the prince is behind it." Mary's stomach tightened. "They say many things." Mrs. Sykes leaned closer. "And what do you say?" Mary met her gaze, cold and steady. "I say you should mind your own soup and stop sniffing at other people's bowls." Mrs. Sykes recoiled. "Mary Whitfield, you'll regret that tone." Mary's voice did not rise. "Perhaps, but I will regret less than I would if I bowed." Mrs. Sykes's face tightened. Then she turned away, offended. Mary closed her door and pressed her back to it, breathing hard. That evening, a note came through Reverend Collins. Plain paper, no crest, no flourish. "Mrs. Whitfield, I must see you. Tomorrow, after morning prayers. In the chapel side room. I will not come to your building again. I will not put your stairs in danger. E." Mary stared at the single letter. Her fingers trembled. Thomas babbled softly at her shoulder, tugging at her collar as if insisting she return to him. "I am here," she whispered to him. "Always." The next morning, Mary walked to the chapel with Thomas tucked close. Reverend Collins waited for her, and Edward waited inside. He rose when she entered, as if she were a lady to be honored, not a burden to be managed. Mary stopped just inside the door. Edward's eyes went first to Thomas, then to Mary's face. "You came," Edward said. Mary's voice was guarded. "I said I would." Edward nodded once, accepting the correction. Reverend Collins closed the door and remained nearby, but he turned slightly away, giving them space without abandoning them. Edward spoke quietly. "The copies you gave me were enough to begin." Mary's jaw tightened. "Begin what?" Edward's voice stayed practical. "Oversight, questions, paperwork the court cannot dismiss as emotion." Mary's eyes narrowed. "And Lady Harrowgate," Edward's mouth tightened. "She is not pleased." Mary gave a small, bitter breath. "She will punish me." Edward shook his head. "She will try." Mary lifted her chin. "What does trying look like for someone like her?" Edward hesitated, then spoke with controlled honesty. "She will invite you into rooms to humiliate you politely. She will frame you as ungrateful. She will suggest you are ambitious." Mary's hands trembled. "I am ambitious. I am ambitious for my child to eat." Edward's gaze softened. "That is the only ambition worth defending." Mary looked down at Thomas, who gurgled and reached toward Edward's coat, as if it were simply another interesting thing in the world. Edward did not touch the child. Not yet. He waited, as if asking permission without words. Mary watched him, then shifted Thomas slightly closer. Edward's hand rose slowly and touched Thomas's small fingers with the lightest pressure. Thomas gripped him at once. Edward's throat moved, a swallow that looked like emotion he refused to display. Mary's chest tightened. "You should not," she whispered. Edward's eyes lifted to hers. "Why?" "Because," Mary said, voice trembling, "if you let yourself feel anything, they will use it." Edward's reply was simple. "Then let them see I am capable of feeling." Mary stared at him. "That is not how princes survive." Edward's gaze held hers. "Perhaps that is why they are so lonely." The words struck her harder than any insult. Mary looked away quickly, blinking too fast. Edward did not press. He only spoke again, quieter. "They sent me a threat. You know that." Mary's voice was rough. "Yes." Edward's jaw tightened. "I chose an answer." Mary looked back. "An answer." Edward took a slow breath. "I will not allow them to use your silence as proof that you are ashamed, and I will not allow them to ruin you to keep me obedient." Mary's hands trembled. "That sounds like another speech." Edward's mouth tightened, then softened. "Then let me make it plain." He stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "I care for you," he said. Mary went still. Reverend Collins did not move, but Mary could feel him listening in the way a good man listens when someone's life is turning. Mary's voice barely came. "You do not know me." Edward's eyes did not blink. "I know enough. I know you would rather starve than beg. I know you love your child like breath. I know you look at kindness as if it might bite you, and yet you still allow it when your child needs it." Mary's mouth trembled. "That is not knowing. That is watching." Edward nodded. "Then I will learn properly if you allow it." Mary's pulse hammered. "And what does that mean in your world?" Edward's voice turned steady, as if he had already decided and was simply catching up to the courage to say it. "It means I will ask you to marry me," he said. The room went quiet. Mary stared as if she had not heard correctly. Reverend Collins's breath caught, faint but audible. Mary's voice shook. "You cannot," Edward answered immediately. "I can." Mary's hands tightened around Thomas. "They will destroy you." Edward's gaze stayed on hers. "Then I will be destroyed doing something honest." Mary's throat tightened. "Do not speak like that." Edward's expression softened. "I am not chasing tragedy. I am choosing life." Mary's eyes stung. "You are choosing a scandal." Edward shook his head. "No, I am choosing a family." Mary's breath came shallow. "I am not a blank page you may write redemption upon." Edward's voice went lower. "I am not trying to redeem you, Mary. You are already good." Her name in his mouth here in this plain room sounded different than it had in the street. Not possession, not performance, something careful. Mary's voice broke. "My child." Edward's hand lifted, palm open, not reaching for her, only offering. "I will honor him," Edward said. "And I will honor you, not in secret, not as a charity case, as my wife." Mary shook her head, tears threatening, anger rising to stop them. "You say these things because you are angry at them." Edward's gaze sharpened. "I am angry at them, but I am not mistaken about you." Mary turned slightly away, struggling for air. Reverend Collins spoke softly. "Mrs. Whitfield, you may say no." Mary laughed once, broken. "Do you think I do not know that?" Edward's voice was calm. "Say what is true, not what is safe." Mary's eyes closed for a heartbeat. Then she opened them and looked at him, as if daring him to be real. "If you marry me," she said, "they will look at me like dirt in a drawing room." Edward nodded. "Then I will stand beside you in the drawing room." Mary's voice trembled. "They will say I trapped you." Edward's eyes held hers. "Then I will say, I walked into love with open eyes." Mary swallowed. "They will say my past is suspicious." Edward's jaw tightened. "Then we will answer questions with truth, not with fear." Mary's breath caught. "And if the crown forbids you," Edward's voice did not waver, "then I will give up what must be given up." Reverend Collins inhaled sharply. "Your Highness." Edward looked at him. "I do not speak lightly, Reverend." Mary's lips parted. "Give up what?" Edward turned back to her. "Privileges, allowances, certain roles, whatever is demanded to keep the palace comfortable." Mary stared at him, horrified. "You would throw away your life?" Edward's reply was quiet. "I would stop living someone else's." Mary's eyes filled despite her fight against it. Thomas made a small sound and pressed his cheek against Mary's collar, warm and trusting. Mary whispered, almost to him, "What am I doing?" Edward's voice softened, choosing. Mary looked at Edward again. "Do you truly want me?" she asked. "Or do you want the feeling of saving someone?" Edward's expression tightened with sincerity. "I do not want to save you. I want to stand with you. You were standing long before I found you." Mary's shoulders shook. Reverend Collins stepped forward one pace, gentle. "Mary." Mary looked at him, eyes wet. He said softly, "There are moments when pride is not a shield, but a door. You may keep it closed. But do not call the closed door virtue if your heart is begging to open it." Mary let out a shaking breath. Edward did not rush her. He only waited, palm still open. Mary looked down at his hand. Then, slowly, she placed her fingers in his. His hand closed around hers with care, not claiming, not squeezing, just holding as if he had been taught finally how to touch someone without turning them into a symbol. Mary's voice trembled. "If I do this, you must never make me feel small." Edward's gaze held hers. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you do not." Mary swallowed. "And you must never use my child as a shield." Edward's jaw tightened. "Never." Mary's lips quivered. "And you must promise that if fear returns, you will not let it turn you cruel." Edward's voice was steady. "I promise." Mary nodded once, as if sealing something inside herself. "Yes," she whispered. Edward's breath left him as if he had been struck by happiness he did not know how to carry. He lowered his head, still holding her hand. "Then I will ask properly," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Mary Whitfield, will you marry me?" Mary's eyes burned. "Yes." Reverend Collins turned away, discreet, but Mary heard him whisper almost like a prayer, "Thank God." From that moment, things moved with a strange mix of resistance and inevitability. There were meetings Edward attended with a calm face and a steel spine. There were arguments held behind closed doors where polite words tried to corner him into surrender. There were shocked pauses when he refused to be steered back into safe choices. Lady Harrogate attempted her final weapon, public sympathy. She arrived at a charity gathering with a soft expression and a louder rumour, speaking of vulnerable women and men who are too tender-hearted for their own good. Edward responded not with humiliation but with clarity. When asked, he said simply, "The vulnerable deserve protection, not suspicion, and charity deserves honesty, not theatre." The room had gone quiet, not because it agreed, but because it could not safely argue. And then the accounts were reviewed, not with shouting, with ink. The sums that did not match could not be laughed away. The receipts that vanished were suddenly remembered. The pressure shifted, and Lady Harrogate found herself stepping back, not because she was dragged, but because the ground beneath her had become uncertain. Mary, meanwhile, kept working. She stitched and mended, and she fed Thomas with parish credit that carried no shame. When another mother approached her at the pump one morning, eyes downcast, Mary did not turn away. "Is it true," the woman whispered, "that the dairy will not turn us away if we are short?" Mary hesitated, then nodded. "It is true." The woman's eyes filled. "Who did that?" Mary's voice was quiet. "Someone who finally looked." The wedding was simple, because Mary demanded it be simple. "No parade," she told Edward the day Reverend Collins brought the special license papers. "No room full of people pretending kindness while hunting for something to sneer at." Edward nodded. "As you wish." Mary lifted her chin. "And no pity." Edward's gaze softened. "Only pride." Mary's mouth tightened, but her eyes betrayed her. "Yes, pride." Reverend Collins cleared his throat. "Then tomorrow morning." Mary's hands shook. "Tomorrow." Edward watched her carefully. "If you wish to delay—" Mary cut him off. "If I delay, fear will grow teeth. We do it before fear learns to speak." Edward's lips parted. Then he nodded. "Then tomorrow." On the morning of the wedding, Mary stood in the chapel side room with Reverend Collins's wife adjusting her collar with gentle hands. "You are trembling," Mrs. Collins murmured. Mary tried to laugh. "Am I?" "A little," Mrs. Collins said. "That is allowed." Mary's throat tightened. "It feels like stepping off a cliff." Mrs. Collins's eyes were kind. "No, it feels like stepping into a life that was not meant for you by those who like to decide such things." Mary swallowed. "And if they are right," Mrs. Collins took Mary's hands, "then let them be wrong in the face of your happiness." Thomas babbled from his blanket, entirely unimpressed by history. Mary looked at him and whispered, "We are doing this." Reverend Collins appeared at the doorway. "Mary." Mary turned. He offered his arm. "Shall we?" Mary hesitated, then took it. In the chapel, Edward waited. He was not smiling widely. He looked as if he were holding himself together by will alone. But when Mary entered, his face changed with such open relief that Mary's eyes stung at once. She reached the front and stopped. Edward spoke softly, for only her. "You came." Mary's voice trembled. "I said I would." Edward's hand lifted, hesitated, then offered. "May I?" Mary placed her hand in his. Reverend Collins began the ceremony, voice steady, words familiar and ancient. Mary barely heard them at first. She heard only her own heartbeat and Thomas's small sounds, and the way Edward's thumb brushed her knuckles once, as if reminding her she was not alone. When it came time to speak, Mary found her voice. "I do," she said, and it was not small. Edward's voice followed, low and sure. "I do." Reverend Collins looked at them both as if he had been waiting his whole life to say the next words. Then he said them. Edward turned slightly toward Mary, still holding her hand, and for a moment he simply looked at her, as if he needed to see her fully before he could believe what had happened. Mary's lips trembled. Edward whispered, "Mary," she answered, "Edward." And then he kissed her, brief and gentle, reverent enough to make the air feel sacred, but real enough to make Mary's knees go weak. When they pulled apart, Mary let out a breath that sounded like laughter and crying at once. Reverend Collins's wife wiped at her own eyes, smiling. Outside the chapel there were no trumpets. There was only daylight, and the quiet sense of something irreversible. Edward offered Mary his arm. Mary hesitated. Edward leaned closer and murmured, "If you fear the stairs, tell me." Mary lifted her chin. "Let them stare. I have been stared at my whole life. At least now I am not alone under their eyes." Edward's breath caught, and his hand tightened gently around hers. They walked together. In the weeks that followed, the world did what the world always did. Some people softened, some people stayed sharp. But the sharpness no longer had the same power, because Edward did not flinch and Mary refused to shrink. Edward moved out of the rooms that had made him lonely and into a quieter household that belonged to both of them. He still carried duty, but not like a chain. Like work he chose. Mary kept her name for as long as she wished in her own mouth, and took his when she chose to, not as a rescue, but as a bond. One morning, Mary returned to the dairy shop. "Mrs." Pritchard looked up, eyes widening, then narrowing. Mary set a coin on the counter. "1 bottle," Mary said. Mrs. Pritchard eyed her. "You're paying." Mary's voice was calm. "I always pay, even when I pay with pride." Mrs. Pritchard's mouth twitched. "That sounds expensive." Mary glanced down at Thomas, now sturdier, reaching for the bottle with bright impatience. "It used to be," Mary said softly. "Not anymore." Behind her, the bell rang again. Edward stepped inside, plain as ever, hat in hand, and Mrs. Pritchard froze. Edward nodded to her politely. "Good morning." Mrs. Pritchard swallowed. "Good morning, sir." Mary did not look back at Edward immediately. She finished the exchange, took the bottle, and turned. Edward's gaze warmed at the sight of Thomas. Thomas reached for Edward with both hands, as if claiming a familiar presence. Edward laughed under his breath, surprised and helpless, and took the child with careful arms. Mary watched them, her chest tightening with a feeling that was almost unbearable. Edward looked at her over Thomas's head. "Are you well?" Mary's voice was steady but soft. "Yes." Edward stepped closer, still holding Thomas, and spoke low enough that only she could hear. "Do you remember the morning you returned milk?" he said. Mary's throat tightened. "I remember everything." Edward's gaze held hers. "That moment changed my life." Mary's eyes burned. "It changed mine too." Edward's voice gentled. "Not because I paid." Mary swallowed. "Then why?" Edward answered simply. "Because you did not beg. You stood, and I realized I had been living my whole life without ever truly standing for anything." Mary's lips trembled. "And now?" Edward's mouth softened. "Now I stand here." Mary nodded once, fighting tears. Edward shifted Thomas, then reached for Mary's free hand, his fingers laced with hers, warm and sure. Mary let herself lean into that warmth just slightly, the smallest surrender that was not surrender at all, but trust. And as they stepped out into the street together, Mary understood a truth she wished every weary heart could hear. One quiet act of compassion can begin a storm of change, and sometimes the greatest freedom is simply being seen, believed, and loved, without shame. Thank you so much for listening to this story, all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.